Welcome back. I'm going to show you how to make a door-to-door binding, a binding that opens from two sides. The nice thing about this binding is the cover is continuous. So we're using one cover and attach two sections from either side. You will need a long sheet of paper and your inside pages, all running short grain. And in the first video, you learned how to check your grain direction, so hopefully you will be able to trim your sheets of paper properly to get the right grain direction. For the inside pages, we're using A5 sheets. So let's get the A5 sheets folding. Fold them again, one by one. Use your Bonefolder from the center to the outside and create your first section. For this, I would say we are folding 5 sheets for one section. Here we go. I'm going to do another one, again with 5 sheets of paper inside. Here we go. 2 sections for either side of your door-to-door binding. The size of your cover paper is 330 millimeters in width and 148 millimeters in height. So the length, as I said, is 33 centimeters. So we are dividing it by 3, which gives us 11 centimeters. So mark 11 centimeters on top and on the bottom. Use the ruler to align it. Get your Bonefolder. Move the ruler ever so slightly that the tip of the Bonefolder is touching your pencil mark. And then just pre-crease the cover by pushing it. And then you fold it over. You can still adjust it on the 2 sides if it's not perfectly aligned. And all you need to do for the other side is fold it backwards. And if your measurements are accurate, it should fold perfectly on top of the other fold, or on top of this edge. Then we can place the sections in between and check that it fits nicely. And luckily, your creep is not coming out on either side, because I measured the cover slightly longer so that you have enough space for the creep to sit in. This time I'm going to show you how to make a 5-hole pamphlet stitch. And what we would like to do with that is that your holes are meeting perfectly on the other side. So for that, we actually need to either create a template again or measure it really accurately. So In the first video I showed you to do it just with a piece of paper. We can do that again. So fold just a piece of paper in half, which is the same height as your book. And to get 5 holes, you will have to fold one side in 3 parts. So you have to try to get them as accurate as possible, folding on top of each other. And the same with the other side. This is my template showing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 folds, which gives me 5 holes. Now I'm placing it in and I transfer my marks. And then do the exact same thing for the other side. And you want to have your marks right on the center. And put it to the side. You can take out your sheet, one of the sections, so you don't need to secure it, and start piercing your holes one by one, perfectly holding it in an angle so that you come out on the fold. And just do the exact same thing for the other side. Measure your thread. I'm going to use a white one. 4 times the height, because I can actually sew both sides with one thread. So if you want to have different colors on either side, just measure it twice the length, the height of your book. But I'm going to want to have white on both sides, so I'm just going to measure 4 and a tiny bit longer. Do the same with your needle. Pierce through the shorter edge of your thread, pull it down and up, and that's your double thickness thread, and also acts like a knot. For this binding, I'm going to start on the center and the center hole. If you would like to have your ends on the outside, start from the outside. I'm going to hide my knot on the inside, pull it through, leave a bit of a tail, come to the next hole. Doesn't matter which way you go. If you struggle piercing through, just pierce again from the center so that the needle knows where to go. Once you came across to the next hole, you come to the top hole. Kind of finish off one side first before you go on to the other side. Come back, come to the inside. And now you might remember what we did in the first video. We skipped over to the next hole. So don't go through the center again. tighten it well, come to the top. Again, if you struggle coming through, just re-pierce it. Finishing off this side and closing the gaps. Come to the next hole, backwards and back through the center. Make sure you come out on either side of the thread to make a knot right on top of here. And I'm just going to make a double knot and trim it at a roughly centimeter or a bit longer, as you wish. And then we do the exact same with the other side. I'm going to open this up so I have a bit more freedom to sew this. Make sure you find the hole where it goes. Leave a bit of a tail. Turn it around. Tighten it to the top. Come back to the next hole. So we're finishing off this side first before we come onto this side. Just gonna grab a bit more thread onto this side. Skipping the center again, coming over to this hole. Tighten it, come to the top. And come back, filling in the gaps and back through the center. Again, come out either side of the long thread to make a knot right on top of here. I should have left a tiny bit more thread to make my life a bit easier. And the same. And just cut it again, leaving roughly a bit more than a centimeter, and your dos-à-dos binding is done. The next binding I'm going to show you is a mirror book, which is a book that opens with the two sections kind of talking to each other. So again, we're using a cover that connects the two sections, but instead of with the dos-à-dos there on the other side, we're using it on both sides, like on the same side, facing each other. So, again, for the inside, we're using A5 sheets with the grain direction running short grain. The cover is the exact length of an A3, which is 420 or 420 or 42 centimeters. This time we don't need to do any measurements, which is great, because all we need to do is we fold it in half. Use your Bonefolder to get a really nice crisp fold. Then I'm folding it backwards because it's easier for me to fold it this way. Make sure it aligns perfectly. Use the Bonefolder, give it a crisp fold, and do the same with the other side. Now, fold it backwards to the inside. And the same with the other side. That's your cover. Now, fold 5 sheets for either side, for one section. Placing them inside each other. So that's one section. And luckily, I already have one prepared with 5 sheets inside. And they go on either side of your cover. Now, you can see the creep is coming out at the front. This time, we will have to trim it, because otherwise your book won't open. So, what I'm going to do is take the sections out, get a cutting mat, and to make my life easier, I'm just going to measure I'm measuring 10.5. You can come in even a bit more if you want to. Make sure your ruler is not moving when you do the trimming. And again, really gently do one sheet after the other. Here we go. Same thing with the other one. Actually, before, double check. I actually need to trim more. So I'm just going to double check. Looks like I need it to 10.2. So let me do this again. And again, make sure your ruler is not moving. And this looks much better. There's no creep coming out. So let's do the same with this. 10.2. top and bottom. You can also align it to the grid. Oh, that's not great. My ruler moved in the last moment, but luckily I went through all the way. And here we go. That's my mirror book now closing nicely. I'm not going to trim top and bottom because they were all cut to the same height, so they should be okay. So I'm going to clean my workstation before I start with preparing my holes. This time I want to show you my favorite tool, which is a spring divider that looks like this. Looks almost like a compass, but instead of having a pencil on one side, it's two pointy sides. And the great thing with this is I can measure the exact measurement, so keeping it equal. So I'm measuring the height of my book, which is 14.8. So 14.8 divided by, we have 5 holes, but we're not going to divide it by 5 because we want to know the gap in between. So we need to divide it by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to get the gap in between. So 148 divided by 6 is 24.6, which would be 2.4 2 centimeters and 4 millimeters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure 2.4 with the spring divider, and because it's 2.4666, I'm just going to add a fraction to it. So now I have the measurement, and what I do is, because it's a bit of an odd number, I'm going to start marking from either side, coming from the center to the outside. I'm not using this as a piercing tool, I'm just using it as a measuring tool. And now I'm a tiny fraction off, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the center of these 2 marks. Because you still have your template from the binding earlier, feel free just to use this. But I wanted to show you a spring divider, which is a great tool in bookbinding that helps you measure really evenly your holes. So again, I'm going to come in from either side, and the center I will adjust by just making the hole in between. If you would measure from one side to the other, and this side would be either shorter or longer, your eyes will catch that straight away. But if you do it always from the outside to the inside, and these 2 parts are slightly bigger or smaller, you won't notice it. So, next stage is piercing your hole. So I'm just going to open this up, get my grey board, hold it in an angle, and again place it perfectly in the center and start piercing it. And the same with the other side. I'm going to use a red thread for this. It's already pre-cut, so this time I'm not going to worry about trimming it. But again, because it's 2 sections at the same time, if you want 2 different colors, cut it twice the height. If you want the same color, just cut it 4 times the height of your book. Same thing, we're going to thread the needle and pierce through the thread and pull it down and up again. This time I'm going to have I just struggle actually seeing my holes, so I'm just going to re-pierce them quickly all. And this time I want to have the ends on the outside. So I'm starting from the outside, center hole. Sometimes, depending on the paper, you might have to pull a bit more, and also depending on the thickness of your thread. Leave a bit of a tail, come across to the next hole. Your thread might tangle really easily if you have tools on your table, so keep it nice and clean. So, given you already sewed 2 sides with the 5-hole pamphlet stitch, you should be fine doing this without watching me. Skip the center. The nice thing about this binding is it actually just works with odd numbers. So you can do either a 3-hole pamphlet stitch, a 5-hole pamphlet stitch, or 7. It's endless. You could do a hole after each centimeter to create more like a singer sewing binding. Tighten it again when you get to the end. Make a double knot. And cut the thread enough to do the other side. And again, I'm just gonna make sure that my holes are big enough so I don't struggle piercing it through. I start from the outside and just repeat the exact same thing. Finish off one side first. Tighten it well, come back and through the center, coming out either side of the thread. To tie it down, you just make a double knot. And that's your mirror book done. And maybe just use your Bonefolder again, just to fold it down if there's a lot of, if your bounce is still open, and then it can be closed like this. I'm going to show you a couple of samples per book, per structure, so you get an idea of how books like this are actually used in the industry. The nice thing about a do-a-do binding is that you can combine either text and images on one side or two different stories that meet in the center. It's almost a book with no beginning and no end. So the possibilities are endless to actually use this book. And I want to show two examples that have used this kind of binding. They are bound slightly differently, but they have the same concept. This binding, for example, opens, it's called Top and Top from Liam Maggie, and it's a photographic book that basically opens this way, and then this time, this one, you actually have to flip around, which is slightly different to maybe the one you use, but you can actually use it flipping. So the idea with this book is actually playing with the top. That's why it's also called Top and Top. Then this is another really interesting example. It's a do-a-do with a spiral bound, and as you can see, it actually uses two different colors because it speaks about two different stories. One very personal story of a couple going to see the Challenger mission and actually seeing it, what happens to it, the Challenger's disaster. And it's a really private story, whereas on the other side, it's a collection of the NASA explaining what had happened during this time, and you get these two really interesting stories meeting, one really personal and one kind of more documentary based. And it plays with the idea that everyone has memories when disasters happen. For example, when we all maybe still remember on the day what we did on 9/11. So this is a quite interesting play with a disaster we all shared, or we might not because we weren't born then, but then also what we have done in that moment. So it's a quite nice way to show something really personal and public meeting in between. So that's one way of using this binding. And the other two bindings I would like to, or the mirror book I want to show you, is basically an echo book, which is called The Department of Reading. And it's quite nice. The spine on one side it says reading, on the other side it says writing, and on the right side it is full of essays, and on the other side it's comments on the essay. So it's quite a nice way to combine the two and how they meet with writing and reading. Another example that I actually worked on with another artist, Corinne Vionnet, is a book which is called What Remains. And it's two stories, two very personal stories of what I remember. So it's I remember, so every sentence starts with I remember, whereas this on one side is my personal story of what I remember of the first lockdown in London, whereas Corinne Vionnet, an artist based in Geneva, at the Lake Geneva in Vevey, explains her story, how she experienced her first lockdown, and it's quite nice of what stories meet, or what kind of concerns meet, or even joy, or kind of mirror, which are similar, and what kind of things drift away. So it's another way of bringing two stories together and meeting sometimes, but being by themselves as well. So yeah, these are another two examples of a mirror book. It just has endless possibilities to use formats and combining stories. And the nice thing about bookmaking is if you use the form of the book and give it some texture to it, sometimes through the paper or the materials, you can actually create a really interesting story with it. And I leave you with this. I hope you enjoyed the workshop, and I hope you continue making books. Thank you.